With Final Fantasy just around the corner, I wanted to build a deck for one of my favorite sets in recent history, Tarkir Dragonstorm. To do this, I'm going to be building a commander deck with only cards from the set. With this deck, I also want to try to encapsulate the entire set as a whole, and try and incorporate as many of the different gameplay elements and unique cards that came with Tarkir Dragonstorm. And now, Tarkir as a plane is separated into 5 tricolor clans: Eshki, Temur, Sultai, Azban, and Mardu, each of them with their very own unique gameplay styles. And now what sucks for me, the deck builder, is that I'm going to have to pick a creature from one of these tricolors because there isn't any 4 or 5 color commanders from this set, which sadly means that 2 of the 5 colors is going to be left out of this in-set deck, but let's focus on picking out our commander and making the most of it. To narrow down the list of potential commanders, I'm going to knock off Sultai and Azban off the list. Sultai dealing with graveyard recursion and mechanics like Delve, I feel like is something that is just too generically good, and something that if I was to build a deck around Sultai, I wouldn't think of Tarkir Dragonstorm, I would just think generic Reanimator or generic Delve. Azban has a very unique toughness matter style game plan, but on the other end of the spectrum, I think that it's too unique to where there isn't that many cards from the other clans I can build around, and there just isn't enough cards in set to make an Azban deck fully work. And so now, that brings us down to Mardu, dealing with the Mobilize mechanic, Temur, that focuses on big stompy creatures, mainly dragons, and finally Eshki, that plays around with the Flurry mechanic. And honestly, all of these clans are just way too cool. I'm just going to have ChatGPT pick which tricolor I should use, and then open up a bundle box to find some cards I want to use for this deck. And now let's see what ChatGPT says and start cracking open some packs. Alright, and so of course ChatGPT gives us the Dragon Focus color combo for this deck. So now let's rip open this box and see if we find any cards worth using. First, with the little promo pack that they give us, we're actually going to pull a great card for the deck in Temur Battlecrier. Temur Battlecrier says that during our turn, spells that we cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature we control with power 4 or greater. And now, building in the Temur colors for this deck, a lot of the Temur cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm are based around big dragons, which means if we have 3 or 4 creature cards with power 4 or greater on the battlefield, that means that all of our spells during our turn will cost 4 generic mana less to cast. Such a great card, happy to pull it here in this promo pack. And now let's go ahead and speedrun some of the big hits that we got from our packs. So, after ripping open that booster bundle, we actually have a lot of great cards to include, especially with our Temur colored deck. But let's first hit on some ground rules for deck building with this in-set deck. The Tarkir Precons are some of the best that we've seen recently, but I will not be using any reprints from these decks. What I am going to be allowing myself is cards that were first released from the Precons. So, I'm not going to be allowing myself to include cards like Lathliss Dragon Queen, which were reprinted in the Temur Precon, but can use cards like Broodcaller's Scourge, which was originally printed with the Temur Precon. This, at least for me, makes it so I'm not just throwing in stable cards like Seaborn Muse and Temur Ascendancy, and actually making this deck unique to Tarkir, not just using reprints from other sets. I'm also not going to be allowing this deck to have either of the face commanders from the Temur Precon. While both are originally from Tarkir Dragonstorm, I feel like including them would just make this deck feel more like a revamped Precon over a unique Tarkir Dragonstorm focused deck. The only cards that I'm going to be allowing myself to use from the Precons are whatever lands were included in the Precon, and also key ramp spells printed in the Precons like Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Talisman, etc. I will still be limiting myself to what is actually in all of the Precons though, like how in Temur colors, only the Talisman of Impulse and Creativity were reprinted, meaning I am not allowed to use the Talisman of Curiosity since it was not reprinted. And this is the same logic I'm going to be using for land ramp spells in this deck, as only cards like Cultivate and Farseek will be included since those are the cards that were reprinted in all of the Precons. Staples like 3 Visits in Nature's Lore won't be since they were not reprinted. And now the reason I'm making this exception for ramp and for the mana base is just because those are cards that only smooth out the deck and don't really make up the content, if that makes sense. Having a ramp spell like Farseek that was reprinted in this deck really doesn't break my immersion of it being a Tarkir Dragonstorm focused deck like throwing in a reprint like Hellkite Courser would. It's just a personal decision that I made to make this deck run smoothly and still be set based. But let's jump into the actual cards in this deck. And let's start with the most important part, picking our commander. The two main commanders that we can choose from are Ureni the Song Unending or Eshki Dragonclaw, and I think that there is a clear choice for this deck in going for Eshki in the command zone. Eshki is a great commander for this deck, not only because I just pulled her, but also because its ability synergizes really well with a lot of the mechanics from Tarkir Dragonstorm. For 1 in Teamer, Eshki is a 4/4 with Vigilance, Trample, and Ward 1, and it also has the ability that at the beginning of combat, if we have casted both a non-creature and a creature spell this turn, she gets 2 +1/+1 counters, and we get to draw a card. And now this card is just fantastic for a commander centered around Tarkir for so many reasons. Let's start by breaking it down and fleshing out this deck so you can see how. Starting with its ability of casting a non-creature and creature spell before combat. This means that at minimum, we want to be casting at least 2 spells during our turn. And now this synergizes with the flurry mechanic seen on Jeskai themed cards that care about casting 2 spells during our turn. So just by having this ability, we are checking the box of having some Jeskai representation in this deck. Her also getting +1/+1 counter synergizes a lot with Abzan themed cards that have counters matters effects like Endure, which we actually pulled one of those cards in Warden of the Grove from the bundle. So not only do we get to include Abzan themed cards just for the sake of it, but it also synergizes really well with Eshki herself. So since we want to be casting a lot of spells on our turn, that means we want to either ramp fast or have a lot of cheap spells. Now, Mardu's creature cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm are actually really cheap mana-wise, being usually only 1 to 3 mana, which means that we can get to Eshki's ability easily with another cheap non-creature spell. And now with these creatures, we can also throw in the Mobilize mechanic that Mardu has in this set, now having 3 of the 5 clans represented. And now looking at cards to include to represent Sultai, this was by far the hardest one to get nailed down to where it actually works with the deck. Like stated before, Sultai in Tarkir Dragonstorm is heavily focused on Graveyard Matters, and specifically Land Graveyard Matters cards, which is extremely hard to have included in this Teamer deck with no black in our color identity. The best I was able to do was throw in some cards that are just generic Land Matters with +1/+1 counter based synergies, while also having a couple graveyard recursion spells that I was able to find in green. Sultai is probably the color combo that is least represented in this deck, but I don't really think that there was a lot more I could do to really include it without having black cards that they have, but maybe I'm just missing something. On the other end of the spectrum, Teamer is obviously the most prominent color combo in this deck, having a ton of dragons, ramp pieces, and ways to go big and go wide with giant creatures. So now that we have all 5 clans represented in one way or another, what are some unique and fun cards that we have in the deck? To start, one of the new mechanics in Tarkir Dragonstorm was the Omen mechanic. And now all Omen spells are going to be able to be cast as dragons, but also in the bottom left be able to be cast as instant or sorcery spells. If we were to cast the Omen side or the instant or sorcery side, we would then take that card and shuffle it back into our library, where we can hopefully draw into it again. Omen spells in this Eshki deck are actually very useful, for if we already casted a creature this turn, we can cast it for its Omen side to get that non-creature spell trigger on Eshki, and then vice versa of course. And now, while looking at these cards for a normal commander deck, they might be kind of mediocre. For this one centered around Tarkir Dragonstorm, and especially with Eshki, these are very valuable cards that I'm going to throw into this deck. And now moving to the artifacts in this deck, starting with Dragonstorm Globe, a very nice ramp card in this set that gives us some nice synergies with our dragons and with our +1/+1 counters. Herd Heirloom is another great ramp piece that can double as card draw if needed. And then finally, for ramp with our artifacts, we had to throw in Mox Jasper since we pulled it from the bundle. We then have 3 equipment cards in this deck. Infantry Shield giving us Mobilize from Mardu, and Corey Steelcutter giving us Flurry from Jeskai, and then finally Dragonfire Blade is just an overall good equipment for us to throw onto Eshki. We then have 4 enchantments in this deck, starting with Dragonback Assault, which is a pseudo board wipe while also giving us 4/4 dragons whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control. And then from the Dragonstorm cycle from this deck, we have Roiling and Encroaching Dragonstorm. Roiling being a decent and possibly repeatable source of card draw, and Encroaching being a decent and possibly repeatable source of ramp. We then also have Frostcliff Siege from our pulls, being really good in bumping up our creature's power and also giving them haste, since we will always be choosing Teamer whenever it enters. I will then quickly go over the 2 instants I have in the deck, Focus the Mind being a card draw spell and Piercing Exhale being a semi-removal spell, having one of our creatures deal damage equal to its power to another creature. Moving to the sorceries, we have all of the wills cycle from the clans in our colors, Sultai letting us mill 3 and then returning all lands from our graveyard to the battlefield, plus getting to put +1/+1 counters on a creature we control equal to the amount of lands we have, Eshki giving a optional will to every player, and then letting us cast instant and sorceries from our graveyard. And then finally, of course, we have Will of the Teamer, letting us copy a permanent on the field, making it a 4/4 dragon, and then draw cards equal to the highest mana value of permanents we control. We have one tutor in this deck, being Nature's Rhythm, letting us search for any creature card in our deck and put it directly onto the battlefield as long as we paid enough mana into X. And then we can also cast it from our graveyard using its Harmonize cost. Harmonize meaning that we can tap a creature down, and we can reduce the cost of X by that creature's power. And now for the final sorcery I want to touch on is Genesis Ultimatum, being from the bonus sheet of this set. And now this being the only card from the bonus sheet that I was able to include in this deck, I decided to just throw it in as a nice top end to the deck, and the art is just too beautiful not to include. And while also talking about the bonus sheet, I also did decide to throw in the fetch lands from it, because they are from the set and in all honesty, like the Precon rampant lands, including these isn't going to break the immersion of Tarkir, and if we sit down and I say I'm playing my Tarkir deck and I play these fetch lands, everyone knows that they're from Tarkir because of the beautiful art. These also aren't really changing our power level too much, just once again like the Precon land and ramp cards are just simply smoothing out our deck's mana base. And now finally, let's go over the meat and good part of this deck, the creatures. Now I wanted to put at least one creature from each Precon that was originally printed from that deck. From the Teamer Precon, I grabbed Brewcaller Scourge that lets us put a permanent down for free equal to the amount of combat damage we dealt to a player with dragons. Then there's Caldera Pyramaw from the Eshki Precon, which gets a +1/+1 counter whenever we cast an instant and sorcery spell, and then it burns an opponent equal to its power. From the Mardu Precon is Goldlust Triad, a myriad flying dragon that creates a treasure token off hitting players in combat. Canopy Gargantuan from the Absent Precon, being a giant dragon that on the end step will put a number of +1/+1 counters on one of our other creatures equal to that creature's toughness. And then finally, Floral Evoker from the Sultai Precon gets a +1/+1 counter whenever a land enters the battlefield, plus it has a niche little land recursion effect that we probably won't be using much in this deck. And now of course, there are creatures from the Precons that I didn't mention here. I just wanted to go over one from each Precon just to show again how I'm trying to include each of the clans in this deck as much as possible. And now moving to the main set, Dragonologist is a great card to pair with Eshki, as we can grab a dragon or instant and sorcery from the top 6 cards of our library, depending on what we need in our hand to activate Eshki's ability. If we've already casted a creature spell, we can grab a cheap instant and sorcery off of it entering, and then get Eshki's trigger if we didn't already have one in our hand. I then threw in Ureni the Song Unending into this deck just because I thought it would be wrong to not include the face dragon of our clan in a deck centered around Tarkir Dragonstorm. And now Ureni is actually a great card on its own, having a nice removal ability off of it entering that synergizes with our lands. He obviously made the list. And now there was a very niche mechanic to behold a dragon from the set, which is featured on Sarkhan Dragon Ascendant. Now, Behold is not a very good mechanic, Sarkhan is not a very good card, but it was a mechanic from the set, and Sarkhan is a very large part of the Dragonstorm lore, so he made the list. And now, for the final and probably most controversial card I put into this list, Craterhoof Behemoth. Now, I know, it is a reprint from the set, and I said I wasn't going to do it with the Precons, but I do have a very good reason for why he made the cut. Because I said so. Now, in all honesty though, Craterhoof being a card that you could pull and play boosters and just be a great finisher is why I put it in this deck. Craterhoof also got a unique art that is unique only to Tarkir Dragonstorm, so it's not like all of the Precon reprints where they didn't get different arts, it's actually unique to Tarkir Dragonstorm. All of these factors really just pushed it over the edge to make the list, since this deck really needed a big finisher. And now, if you disagree with me putting in Craterhoof and don't like that it's in, well then that really sucks, I hope that you can get over it. The deck as a whole is sitting at bracket 2 on the bracket scale. While it is a theme deck being centered around one set, it isn't a meme deck by any means, it's still playing to win. With one tutor card in Nature's Rhythm and a finisher like Craterhoof, this slots in very nicely into bracket 2. I would say that it would be around an average Precon now. It's going to have games where it's super synergistic, where we can slam down some big creatures and pump them up with some +1/+1 counters, but it also is going to have some non-games where we can't seem to draw the right creature or ramp spells. This is a combat deck through and through with some big dragons to wreak havoc, and for Tarkir, I think that really fits the set well. And now for the full deck list, you can look in the description below, and be sure to let me know some cards you think I should have included or that maybe I missed. And now with Final Fantasy just around the corner, and with the near future of Magic the Gathering being filled with universes beyond and space-themed sets, this is going to be a deck list I look back on whenever I just want those OG vibes of Magic the Gathering again.